Hello and welcome to Stellar Strategy Gaming. Today we will be discussing Age of Empires 2 and more specifically how the Lithuanians in Age of Empires 2 are completely broken. And specifically what makes them broken, in my opinion, is their food buff, though they also have some pretty strong modifiers outside of that. We'll be examining a game that Ben here played as the Lithuanians today so that we can really see in action just how broken they are.
Right, so what you're seeing here is just the early stages of the game. I'm building a house, I'm getting my villagers to start shepherding more sheep, and I queued up more villagers. Now, I didn't think to bring up the Lithuanians tech tree for this, but as Mara pointed out, the Lithuanians do get a buff that they start with 150 additional food, and right here you can see rather than having that fifth villager I made go ahead and start slaughtering sheep in order to keep the food production going, I'm having that villager build a mill, which will keep a steady supply of food coming. So basically what this allows you to do is it allows you to think a little bit more long term. I don't remember which Judena song it is where he says, I've got a 100-year plan, you're just thinking about today, but it allows you to think a lot more long term because you know you're going to be able to keep churning out villagers uninterrupted. Now, this is a little bit of a weird map. You're in kind of a bowl of it's like a valley where there's forests at the top of the mountains around it. This was randomly selected by the computer. And it works pretty well for the Lithuanian style. It's relatively predictable where the enemy is going to be, and we'll see in a bit how I was able to use that to my advantage in this game. The reason why I'm having the scout cavalry just go around the very immediate area rather than seek out the enemy is because I want to make sure to seek out resources before I do that. There's nothing worse than, I need a such and such, but you can't find the such and such. And for example, the such and such that he just found was a forest and also some goats for my villagers to hunt, or sheep, or whatever those things are. I don't care. Point is, it's about being able to grind for resources at this point. Now, the enemy scout cavalry has already found my village. I am playing against another person here. I don't know much about the other player. What he clearly did, though, is he clearly prioritized finding me over finding resources. For all I know, he may have had everything he needed right at the start, but I don't find that to be the most winning strategy for a couple of reasons. One, you can find yourself in the position where you're not able to locate resources, which can be disastrous. Also, it's fairly common for players to actually go out of their way to kill the scout cavalry when it rides through, and that's especially nasty if it happens during the Dark Age because you have no way to make more scout cavalry at that point.
Yes, and something else that I'm noticing here is just that villager count already skyrocketing. At this stage in the game, I usually have between 10 and 11 villagers. I'd say if it's a very good day and I found my resources very quickly and I'm not playing a civilization with a weird starting location, because I know some of them have special starts. But here, you're already at 16, and I'm going to guess you're going to be at 17 unless you're already saving up for the upgrade, which would also be incredibly early here. So it isn't really just the raw food benefit, it's also the fact that you're immediately translating those into the villagers, which increase that resource output so much. In fact, I think that's the only thing which the Lithuanians, from what I can tell, have a debuff to, is the fact that because they have more villagers, they consume their resources faster overall. But even then, that's just another strength if you really think about it, because they're harvesting faster as well.
So it's an interesting point you made about the villager count. I have a more aggressive play style than you do, and there is a reason for that. I know most of the play you've done has been against the computer, whereas I've gotten more and more into playing against other people. I played in this style with the Lithuanians in a match against the computer in hard mode recently, and what I discovered is that when you're playing against the computer, when you advance to the next stage, the computer will immediately advance to the next stage. It's a cheat that the computer does. I don't know all the specifics about it. Maybe somebody who's an expert in coding or whatever can explain it in the comments, or or tell me I'm wrong or whatever. The point is, playing this way against the computer will actually I won't say it'll cause you to lose, but it doesn't make it easier to win. The games that play the best against the computer are when you really build up within each age. You still need to advance fairly quickly, but it doesn't. The sort of hyper advancement is not rewarded. So as you can see, I just cracked 500 food and immediately started advancing to the next age. And I don't remember what I did at this point, but I'm going to guess that if I haven't already, I will be shortly building a barracks.
Yes, and something I'd like to mention here is that it was either the first or second time I played this game. I played the Italians, and I thought to myself, wow, these guys are overpowered because they have like a minus 15% reduction in upgrade costs for ages. And so some of you might be saying, oh, well, 150 food, that roughly would translate into something similar to that 15%, wouldn't it? It's basically just the same thing. And my response is, no, it's not, because villagers can actually harvest resources, whereas advancing to the next age, it's a useful little mechanic where if you can do it faster and for cheaper, great, but it's not going to give you that one up that an extra 3 villagers will early game, which I think is what the extra 150 food will translate into. So even for the next most overpowered civilization in the current build, which I still think is the Italians, these guys are still a mile ahead of them.
I have to agree with that for the simple fact that while that reduced cost to advance to the next age is a great buff, there is another civilization that has it. I forget which one it is. But when you give somebody the raw food cost for something, you're giving them options. So if I really need to use that 150 for some technology research, or if I really need those 3 villagers to build me a wall because I know I'm playing against an aggressive opponent, whatever it is, you have the option of just doing that. And an option to do whatever it is you want is always going to be better than just you get this buff. And you can see here I've already started making frontline militia. I haven't upgraded them yet. My guess is I was particularly on my game and I probably made a bunch of them and then started upgrading them to the next level, and will probably be sending them on shortly to attack, or maybe not. Maybe I wasn't quite there with it. But point is, the best strategy here is to make a bunch of guys and then start doing their upgrades. Where I tend to fall flat a lot of times as a player, yep, that's just what I did. I sent them off. Oh, I waited for the upgrade. Silly me. But where I tend to go wrong as a player is a lot of times I'll do the upgrades before I make any guys. It's logical. You don't want to have a bunch of weak units. But since the upgrades are retroactive to all the units you have like that, if you make a bunch of them and then do the upgrade, you now have a lot of strong guys. Whereas if you go through the upgrades, you have this period of having no units, which means if you get attacked, you've got nothing to fight with. So, not so great.
Yes, and something else that I'm seeing here a little bit is I'm actually becoming curious on how the Lithuanians would match up against, I'd say, the third most powerful civilization as the Cumans, in the sense that the Cumans get to build a second town center and age early, and I think they might even get it for free. I'm not 100% sure on that.
Not for free.
Okay.
That would be just beyond game breaking. That would be just don't even bother playing. Go on with what you were saying.
All right, yeah, I wasn't 100% sure, so thanks for clarifying. But the town center and age early could definitely provide for both more survivability, because if you place them closer together, then you can have your villagers go into one to protect the other. But the other thing that I'm thinking of for these more competitive matches is that you could just be pumping out villagers at twice the rate, quite literally, and or have one be pumping out villager enhancement tech while the other is pumping out villagers themselves. And so I feel like they might be the only civilization which could truly theoretically match Lithuania in the production capabilities they have. They'll still definitely start out weaker, because that 150 food at the start is just broken. But yeah, at some point, definitely want to see a Cumans versus Lithuanians game.
So with the Cuman ability, one of the things you can do, a lot of times people don't appreciate how important town centers are as a tool of war. They're great for the ability to make villagers and do research, and plus they're hub for dropping off any and every resource. In addition to that, though, when you're attacked, you can garrison villagers in them, and you can even garrison troops in them when you're not under attack. So, like, whatever you have, you can garrison it in, and it'll shoot arrows at enemy. So what you can do is set up a situation where you've got two town centers sort of having crossfire, protecting each other and protecting villagers. So it's quite potent. Now, as you can see here, he made the advance. Good for him. And it doesn't look like his troops are quite as upgraded as mine. I did do the blacksmith upgrade for these guys, which is why they're killing a lot more of his dudes than are being killed of mine. Also important to sort of note about this is that because I'm the one launching attacks at this point, even though the attacks aren't necessarily doing a tremendous amount of loss on his part, I think I've killed some villagers, destroyed a house, nothing catastrophic. I'm the one setting the priorities. I'm the one setting the tempo of the game. I'm in a situation where my opponent is reacting to me. Where you're in trouble, where you're really losing, is if you're putting everything into attacking your opponent and then all of a sudden they advance to an age ahead of you. Because a lot of times what that means is they've been able to deflect your attacks and still make that next level of progress.
I still think, I do believe though that, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but that's less likely to happen with the Lithuanians as well. That's another place where they just really shine through, because you can get those with those extra resources both at the beginning and from what those free villagers will be providing you, and they are free in effect. Then it provides a bit of security because you can create a few extra troops, whereas most civilizations can't necessarily. And even if you can't create those extra troops, you can be investing it in technology like you did here. And so that's another reason why the Lithuanians are a safe pick, is they can always sort of keep up with the enemy, even if the player isn't 100%.
So the way I would sort of word that or reword that is having the extra food at the beginning gives you a head start. And if you play it right, what happens is that head start grows as the game progresses. And what I mean by that is, you see there was the attack there. We took out a couple more of their villagers while I'm continuing to make more villagers, while my population is continuing to grow. And I'm able to, not only am I making more villagers, they're not just standing around, they're also building farms and building lumber camps and things like that. And particularly with the building farms, or whatever your preferred method of food collection is, it allows you to keep widening that divide. It allows you to keep widening that gap. So even though my dudes have gotten killed, they are slowing my enemy down quite a bit in terms of his ability to continue to advance, his ability to continue to improve upon his civilization and his capabilities. Here you see he's, for whatever reason, he's chasing my scout cavalry around. I don't know why he's making this his priority. I truly don't.
I think he also pissed off that boar right there, because I think that thing was following him until it moved out of its range. So
actually, no, I remember this. This is one of the things that kind of irritates me about the game at times, is sometimes there'll be two things right next to each other and it's not clear what you clicked on, and you will always click on the wrong one. In that case, he was right next to the boar, and I was trying to have my scout attack him, and instead I clicked on the boar, which is actually why I lost the scout in that engagement.
Oh, I misunderstood. Okay, that makes a lot more sense.
Something you have to be careful of here is that it's very easy to find yourself in a position where you get behind on your housing production, and that's really a problem when you're, like when you're under attack or just anything like that. And it's one of the reasons why taking out castles can be game breaking, is because when you get to the castle age, a castle provides housing for 20 villagers. And if you lose a castle, you lose the housing. The Mongols have an upgrade that allows you to have a situation where destroyed houses don't lose their ability to support villagers. It's an upgrade that I've never bothered with, because for that to really be an issue, you'd already have to be losing pretty badly, and I'd rather just, not be losing badly. But it's something that could come up. And so, yeah, I'm able to sort of continue this pattern here. And I know this isn't necessarily the most thrilling thing to see, because it is somewhat redundant. Make more troops, launch more attacks. Although, what happened here, the reason why these troops are not marching toward his village is because I did notice a couple of light cavalry or scout cavalry, whatever those guys are, moving in, and I figured they were going to attack the lumber camp, which they did. So I had my villagers swarm and attack, and because scout cavalry suck for combat purposes, it was able to kind of turn the tide on that. It was also why I had those guys stop destroying the gold mining camp and start doing something that would attack villagers specifically. It was because I wanted to draw him away from his attack on my village.
I see. And I'm noticing you're making a lot of use of cavalry here.
I'm not.
I've seen a few cavalry attack things. I could have sworn on your side there was a blue one that attacked a villager earlier, from my understanding anyways.
Nope.
But the Lithuanians get a bonus to cavalry, if I'm not wrong, in the Castle Age, or is it the Imperial Age? Yeah.
I don't remember. In the Castle Age, they do have their unique unit, which is I'm not quite familiar with the pronunciation, I'm afraid, but it's a unit that has the ability that its attack ignores enemy armor. So they can do a tremendous amount of damage to things like paladins and halberdiers and things like that, the more heavily armored units.
Oh yeah, they're actually the Teuton killers in this game, because I think that the Teutons just rely on heavy infantry that are just armored to all hell. So yeah, these guys would end them.
Pretty much, yeah. And as you can see, we're going, I'm kind of keep coming back to this well. In some ways, this game doesn't necessarily reward creativity. It's easier to keep sort of going back to that well of, I'm going to keep just grinding on you with whatever is working. Now, if this guy had come up with something where he was effectively countering me in some way, where these attacks weren't sort of yielding fruit, then of course I would have gone on to do something different. By the way, I believe this was the point where I started advancing to the Castle Age, which is part of the reason why I'm sort of dumping everything into attacking right now. In the period where you're advancing to the next age, you can be very vulnerable. That can be a really good point to hit somebody. Sometimes people will advance as kind of a desperation move, like, oh, if I get to the Castle Age, maybe I'll be able to make the next level of whatever it is. You don't want to do that if your defenses aren't fairly solid, because what winds up happening is you've now spent all your resources getting to the next age and you have nothing to fight back or to defend yourself with. But if you can get ahead, definitely do that, because it gives you access to better technology, better troops, all that kind of stuff. And it's not just military technology. Your farming speed, your lumberjacks, everything just works faster. Something I am doing here is I'm sending troops to attack different areas, which means that wherever he's massing his forces or planning his defenses, it's going to end up not working. And that's an important part of strategy that people sometimes miss, is they'll just keep trying to grind out against the same spot over and over again. Unless that's a weakened castle or something like that, it's generally not the best plan.
Yes, and as to the resource dump into the next age, I definitely made that mistake when I played in a 1v1 against you. Was just, I was not doing so well, and I was like, oh, if I make the Castle Age, everything will be fine. But I will say, from what you've told me, that there is a bit more merit in an emergency resource dump into the Imperial Age, because a lot of online players tend to never get to the Imperial Age. And so if you manage to do that, the one time that you told me you managed to do that where the other guy hadn't, it caused him to surrender immediately. So if you can sort of play a bit of a mind game where you make yourself seem a little better off than you are, and then you just resource dump into the Imperial Age instead of anything else, you might be able to force a surrender from the enemy just because of low morale, basically, where otherwise you would have lost a game. I mean, I do think that's a bit cheesy in some ways, but it certainly could be viable in lower ranks.
Well, the first video I did about this game was about the Sicilians, so that's just the ultimate cheese play when you use the donjons. That may be the one unit that's as overpowered as the Lithuanians, and that's only because of the donjon and sergeants combo in the feudal age.
I also believe the Sicilians get free units at some point if you build enough town centers. They get 10 per town center.
It's not something I've ever taken advantage of, so I'm not going to comment on how good it is, but yeah, you get, I think it's 10 sergeants per town center, up to a maximum of 6. So if you've built a bunch of town centers, like if that's just your play style, then yeah, and since sergeants can build donjons and donjons can make more sergeants, that can get to be a pretty weird situation where you've got all these guys who can now build all these additional fortifications. So you get to this weird situation where the map is your fortifications. By the way, here I decided to go ahead and add some kniggets to my army. I think the reason I did that was because the enemy army was very infantry heavy. They were basically using their infantry to fight my infantry. And what I was going for there was knights are strong against infantry, and they also have the ability to move around the field a lot faster, so it can be a strong difference maker.
Definitely makes sense. The other thing that sort of comes to mind with all of this, though, when we were talking about the Sicilians just a moment ago, was that with the town centers, they can also act as emergency defensive structures. And so what you could actually kind of pull off is, if you're not in a good way, you can build town centers in regions of the map where the other guy hasn't explored, especially if he's done what this person did, where he just rushes finding you instead of really exploring. And then while he's attacking what he thinks is your main village, you pop the plus 60 free units effectively. And so suddenly him winning goes into him losing all of his valuable units as sergeants just sort of pour out of nowhere. And so yeah, I could definitely see how they could rival the Lithuanians, so I don't think overall they're quite as strong, just because they're a bit gimmicky and you need certain things to fire in a very specific order in order to make the Sicilians work.
So the Sicilians, we went over this more in the Sicilians video, so if it's interested, you should definitely watch that. The Sicilians get strong infantry upgrades. They don't really max out anything. Oh, here we go, we won. They don't max out anything, so I think you're absolutely right, whereas with the Lithuanians are a lot stronger overall. So you can see this guy didn't really have a whole lot. I believe he had built an additional, yep, there it is, an additional town center, but he didn't do anything with it. I don't know why.
Do you know who he was playing, out of curiosity?
Goths.
Ew.
The fact that he never got a castle up is a huge problem, because the Goths' unique unit is very strong. I mean, just incredibly strong. For some reason, it had him winning on military stats. I don't know why that is.
I noticed that when I was spectating your other game, where you basically pushed someone to the very end where they only had villagers, and they had 6 units, but they won in military somehow.
Yeah. This guy collected both more wood and more gold than me, which is actually kind of surprising. I'm not sure how he did that. I made both ages first. Map exploration isn't generally that important in this game mechanic.